So, welcome to the fourth session of this course on managing change in the organization. So, in the last session we basically talked about the role of the change managers and the kind of image that change managers have. Now, moving ahead to discuss what are the different kind of changes that happens in the organization. And here we will talk about two major kind of changes that is taken care is known as incremental change and transformational change. But there could be something in between. It is not always that you are going to have incremental change or a transformational change, but there could be some changes which are going to be mid order. So, incremental changes are known as first order changes, while transformational changes are known as second order changes. So, first of all we will discuss about the major characteristics of the incremental and transformational changes, and then we will see that how this change process is viewed using the concept of equilibrium. So, we start discussing with difference between the incremental and transformational change. Now, if you look at incremental changes, the incremental changes are those kind of changes which continuously happens in the organization, right. For example, you are using manual technology, so you move to mechanical, then you move to a digital technology, right. So, there is an incremental change in only one part of the organization. So, basically when we are talking about incremental change, it talks about a continuous progression. It means, you are going to change just one part, one system, one process in the organization, right. The idea is to maintain the equilibrium or status quo. So, you want to ensure that the productivity does not get affected. So, if some part is not working, so you just replace it, okay, or some part is require some kind of upgradation. So, you update the technology, right. So, basic idea of updating is to maintain the equilibrium. So, basically when we are talking about incremental changes, it is not going to affect the entire organization, but it is affecting only a part of the organization, right. And these kind of changes are affected through the normal process, structure and process. Okay. For example, you find that you need to go for a new department. So, you open a new department because that is required by the organization, but it does not affect other departments of the organization. Suppose you want to bring about some changes in the structure. So, you go for changing, say merging two levels in the organization or merging two departments together, right. So, the idea here is that you go through the normal structure and process of the organization. It is not going to affect the entire organization, it is going to partly affect just a part or system of the organization or a unit of the organization. So, for example, you want to go for updation of the technology or you want to improve the product process. So, you basically engage yourself in certain progressions which is incremental in nature, right. So, suppose you have taken step 1, then you move to step 2, then you move to step 3. So, this is an incremental change, right. So, you are moving ahead step by step to bring about some changes in the technology or in the product. For example, you offer a product, so you add a new feature into a product, right. So, if you add a new feature in the product, it means that you have gone for a incremental change. So, basically basic idea here is that if you add a new feature in the product, you are basically improving the product. It is not going to be a new product, but a product with an added feature, right. So, this is what we know as incremental changes, but when we are going to talk about transformational changes, it is very different. Transformational changes is not a continuous progress. This is the kind of change where you try to bring about changes in everything, and not only a part of the organization is affected, but the entire organization at one go is going to be affected, right. So, you break the entire frame of the organization. You look at the structure, system, process, culture, technology, everything, and you want to go for a change in everything, right. So, you are not any more interested to maintain the status quo in the organization, while maintaining productivity and performance of the organization, but you break it and try to reach to a new equilibrium, new status quo. So, from one state to move to an entirely different state, and in the process what actually happens, you go for transforming the entire organization, not simply a part of the organization, right. You are not updating the technology, but you are bringing about a new technology, and that is what happens in a transformational change, right. So, you are not creating, you are not just changing a part of the structure, but you are creating a new structure or a new process, right. So, when you go through the restructuring exercises and you bring about changes everywhere in the levels, in the reporting relationship, in the number of departments, the units, and you go for changing everything, you go for say restructuring. So, any restructuring exercise in the organization is not something that could be called incremental, but it is going to be called transformational in nature, because at the same time you want to bring about change in everything. And it is not only you are going to change the structure, but you want to bring about a change in the technology of the organization. You also want to bring about a change in the process. You also want to bring about a change in the culture of the organization. You also bring about a change in the HR systems. So, at the same time you want to transform the entire organization, and similarly you want to offer an entirely new product using a new technology. So, if you are going by these kind of things, then you can say yes, it is a case of transformational change. Okay. So, incremental to transformation could be put on a bipolar dimension, where on the one side you say that it is incremental, moving to a progressing on a continuous basis, or transformation where you are going to be totally radical, where you are going to change about everything at the same time, right. So, after discussing about this incremental and transformational change, let us see how this change process happens. What actually happens when you move to any kind of change in the organization. Now, what I am going to discuss here is look at the change, how the change happens in the organization, right. These are the change related activities. Now, if you look at these change related activities, and these are the tipping points. Tipping point shows when the change is happening, right, and why this change is happening, because industry is evolving, you want to bring about change in the development in the organization, you are thinking about the growth, and another important thing is you are moving to change your products and services. So, there is a diffusion of innovation. Now, if you look at different time periods, what happens? These are the different tipping points that is given here. So, sometimes you will find that the change is slow. See, the movement is very slow here, but suddenly there is a steep. It means the change is fast. Then again it becomes slow. So, though you can say that change is a continuous activity, but the rate at which the change is happening is not always same. Sometimes there is a slow change, sometimes there is a fast change, again there is a slow change, sometimes there is no change also. There is a possibility that okay, in the beginning there is a straight line. So, there is no change, and then it moves fast, and then again there is a period of slug where there is no change, and again they move up, right. So, these kind of things might happen. So, that is why it is said that the rate of change is not constant, sometimes there is no change, sometimes there is sudden change. Okay. Something happens in the environment and you are forced to go for some kind of change. Okay. So, the basic point that I want to make here is that it is not that you go only for incremental changes, slow changes, but sometimes you go for continuous what you call discontinuous change, which change very fast, offering new products and services, and once you are stabilized, then again you go for a slow change, right. This concept basically gives rise to what we know as continuous and discontinuous change. So, incremental change is a continuous change. See, moving from A to B, okay. So, the degree of change is, you can see, some more linear, and this shows that it is a case of continuous changes. So, the degree, it is not that there is a certain spike, you do not see that this is moving up, but there is a linear relationship between the degree of change and the time. And when we say this, what I mean to say that this is a case of a continuous change, which could be termed as incremental change. Now, apart from this, we also have discontinuous change. Now, you can see the difference between the continuous change and discontinuous change. Now, if you look at this, the degree of change that is happening is something like this. This is a straight line like this one, but what is happening here is no change, then suddenly there is a change, some change is happening, right. Then again there is a case of no change, then again there is some change, then again no change, right. So, if you look at the line here, it is not linear, but non-linear. This shows that sometimes the change is slow or no, there is no change, and sometimes there is a spike, it means sudden change is there, then again there is a case of no change, and again there is a change. It means that sometimes the intensity of the change is very slow and sometimes it is very fast, right. So, if that happens, this is a case of what you call discontinuous change. Okay. It means that both incremental and transformational changes are happening in the organization depending upon the need of the organization, right. Now, this continuous and discontinuous change basically reflects what kind of changes are going to happen, whether there is going to be incremental changes or whether there is going to be transformational changes. Now, this is what we call a gradualist paradigm, because in a continuous change what happens? If you look at the path, it is straight, it is linear, right. So, there is a change and development through a continuous process of incremental adjustments. So, this is related to what you call incremental change. In case of incremental change, what happens? That you bring about one change, then another change, then third change. See, all these dots show that change is happening in a line, right. So, when we are talking about this gradualist paradigm, right, this says that any organization, when it is going for a change, it becomes a continuous process for incremental adjustments. What I mean to say here by incremental adjustment is that the change that is happening, it has a slow speed and you are changing just one thing at a time, right. And for example, if you are going for updation of the technology, right. So, you update technology tomorrow, and tomorrow again if there is another technology, then you bring it, then again there is another technology, you bring it, but the basic technology that you are using remains same. For example, if you are going for a change in your process to improve it, any kind of process, say supply chain or recruitment process. So, you have a recruitment process in the organization. Now, you look at this recruitment process and you find that there are certain faults at one particular place. So, you improve on that particular process at that particular stage. So, this is what we know as incremental adjustments, right. For example, you know that okay, you are conducting 4 interviews, but you find that instead of conducting 4 interviews, you can remove one of the interviews, okay, and that because that is not required, it does not become relevant today. So, what you have done? You have dropped it. So, this is a what we call adjustment, which is incremental in nature. So, it is a continuous process through which you are doing it, and through this incremental adjustment process, you always align or try to make those changes through which you are able to cope up with the challenges of the external environment, because these changes may be forced by the external environment. So, you need to ensure that through these gradual changes, you are able to make up and cope up with the challenges of the external environment. But this does not happen in case of discontinuous change. See, how you look at it from the perspectives of the intensity of the change. So, this is what we have been talking about. See, this is a incremental adjustment. So, you move up gradually, you keep on changing certain things over a period of time to cope up with the challenges of the environment, and then this incremental adjustments helps you to align better with the external environment and you are able to remain productive. If you compare it with the discontinuous change, if you look at the spikes, see what happens. Something is happening here, there is a slow sluggish growth and suddenly there is a spike. It means the intensity of the change increases suddenly. This shows that some changes are going to occur which are not continuous, something different is happening. For example, you are not updating the technology that you are using, but you are bringing about a new technology at all. You are not going for product improvement, but you are going for a new product, right. You are replacing that old product with a new product. So, the intensity of the change is different here, and if the intensity of the change is different here, then this kind of say spikes are there, and then once you introduce the new product, then again you come back to here, right. So, now what happens? There is a slow change, then you move fast, then you again come back to this. So, both of these kind of changes continuously happen in the organization. It is not that you are always having these kind of spikes. You cannot have frequent spikes, because you cannot go for discontinuous change all the time. You cannot offer new product all the time. You offer a new product, then you settle down, then after some time again you go for a new things, right. So, this is what we know as discontinuous and continuous change. So, this concept of continuous and discontinuous change is known as punctuated equilibrium, right. Punctuated equilibrium means that yes, you have a continuous adjustment, then you also go for discontinuous process. So, both look at this shows discontinuous change, right, and this shows continuous change, right. So, both the continuous change and discontinuous change happened with a punctuated equilibrium. So, this is what we know. See what happens here, there is no change, then again suddenly there is a change, right. So, something that punctures here, something basically forces you to go for a change and then there is spike, right, and then you go for a sudden change. This is discontinuous in nature, okay. And then again you remain sluggish, you do not go for any kind of change, slow change, and then again something happens, something some environmental factors trigger you to go for a bigger changes or discontinuous changes, and then again you maintain the equilibrium, right. So, because of these punctuations that is happening at this particular place and at this particular place, and then again you are maintaining equilibrium, this concept is known as punctuated equilibrium, where you are go for slow change to start with, and then again there is a spike, you go for discontinuous change, again you come back to the same level to maintain the status quo, then after some time then again you go for some kind of spike, that is some discontinuous change, and then again you maintain the equilibrium. So, what I am trying to tell you here is that both kind of things happen in the organization, both continuous change and discontinuous change. Sometimes the intensity of change is slow, sometimes the intensity of change is very fast, but it depends upon how you react to the environment. So, if you look at this case, see both cases you are reaching to the same point, right. So, whether you go for a continuous change, continuously adjusting yourself with the environment, or you go for discontinuous change. The idea in both the cases is to maintain the equilibrium. Now, how you maintain this equilibrium or the status quo depends upon how you go, whether you go for a continuous change or a discontinuous change. Both kind of changes basically are a result of the environmental. So, these environmental forces act as a trigger to go for your change. Depending upon the forces in the environment, whether you are able to control or not able to control, you decide whether you should go for a continuous change or discontinuous change. Now, this concept of punctuated equilibrium, see how we are going to discuss it. What actually happens? There is a puncture. This is punctuated by what? A short periods of radical or discontinuous changes, right. Here also the same thing happens, but in between what happens? There is a long period of equilibrium or status quo, and during this period, see there is no change up to this point, or from here you can say up to this point there is no change. Then suddenly there is a radical change, you go for some kind of change, and then again you create a equilibrium, okay, where there is a little change or very slow change, right. So, this is what we know as concept of punctuated equilibrium. Now, here it is made very clear at what punctuated equilibrium is actually. So, this concept of punctuated equilibrium actually suggests that there both of them possible, continuous change as well as discontinuous changes, right. Sometimes there could be long period of low incremental changes, sometimes there could be short burst of high intensity discontinuous changes, right. Now, if you look at the different time period here, and this basically shows, this axis shows the intensity of the change, and this axis shows the time period. Now, you will see that there are two kind of spikes that you find, the small one and the big one. Now, this shows what? This shows low intensity incremental change, which is punctuated by here at this particular point, and then you find high intensity discontinuous change, and then again there is a drop to low intensity incremental change. Then again there is a short burst of high intensity, you move up, right, there is a discontinuous change, and then again you drop out to maintain the equilibrium. So, there is a again low intensity incremental change. Then again there is a spike, there is a short burst of high intensity discontinuous change, and again you come back to this, there is a drop, right. So, this is what is known as punctuated equilibrium. It means that it suggests that organizations go for both kind of changes, incremental changes as well as transformational or radical changes. Incremental changes are done for certain adjustments on a regular basis, while discontinuous or radical or transformational changes are much more different, okay, and they create some kind of inequilibrium, or they basically dislodge or disbalance what you call the equilibrium. So, but ultimately organizations are able to maintain equilibrium, that you can see here. Now, once this equilibrium is maintained, again there are certain triggers from the environment which forces organizations to move up or bring about certain changes, maybe product, maybe process, maybe system, maybe technology, and then again there is a dropout. So, basically this concept of punctuated equilibrium is used to explain the kind of changes, whether it is going to be incremental or transformational, right, and this makes it very clear. See what happens. Incremental changes where you update, the idea is to do things better. So, incremental changes involve doing things better, right. Look at this, there is a spike. What does it mean? It is a discontinuous change. It involves doing things differently or doing different things, right. So, that this is related to what you call a radical transformation, and this is related to. So, here you have maintained equilibrium, you go for radical transformation, again come back to here, drop out, and again this it is like this only. So, again there is a try to improve upon the things gradually. So, you do not make much big differences, big changes in the organization, right. Okay. So, moving further, see what actually happens. Is it a dominant pattern of change? Does this kind of characteristics is shown by the organization, where you find equilibrium, a period of low intensity change, and then again high burst, high intensity of changes? Is this the characteristics of the organization, that sometimes usually organizations go slow and there is a force from the organization or there is a trigger from the environment, and then organizations go for radical changes, right. Yes, initially what happens, you try to bring about more efficiency in the system, in the product, right, in the organization through gradual changes. So, you can bring about efficiency through gradual changes, but when you are not able to compete using through say gradual changes to bring more efficiency, because the norm of the efficiency has changed. So, you want to come out with a new product, right. For example, you are offering a product, say a motorcycle. So, you are trying to make this motorcycle more efficient by adding new features to it. Okay. Say you want to see that it is going to be very cost effective. Okay. I mean the petrol consumption is low, you want to make sure it is sleek, you want to see that the design changes. So, these are the incremental changes that you are trying to bring in the technology related to motorcycle, right. But suppose you want to use a different technology where you are not going to use petrol at all, right. Suppose you want to offer a bike which runs on not fossil fuels, but say electricity, right, or say you are going to use a solar system to run the bike, which could be a radical change. It means you are not only going to change the design, the system or the process of the motorcycle, but you are going to have a new thing altogether. So, most of the organizations what they do, basically mostly they go for incremental changes, sometimes they go for radical changes depending upon the requirement, Okay. So, the dominant pattern of the change shows what? More equilibrium incremental changes. So, equilibrium is more important, where you have longer periods of low intensity change, but sometimes the requirement asks you or forces you to go for significant or radical changes, right. Now, when we are talking about this, that yes, this is the dominant pattern, and most of the time organizations go through these what you call periods of low intensity change to maintain equilibrium. Yes, this is correct, but there is a reason that this could be influenced or affected by a number of factors. So, what we are going to basically discuss is the impact of those factors which are going to disturb this equilibrium. So, the first one is a fear of change. Okay. Why you try to maintain equilibrium and do not go for these kind of things, discontinuous changes? Because you are afraid of change. Most of the organizations want to maintain a status quo and they do not want to go for a change. Okay. So, the top management are not very much willing to go for any kind of drastic changes or significant or radical changes, because their objective is to maintain the status quo equilibrium. But if you are afraid of the changes that is happening, then how are going to face the uncertain future, because the what kind of future would be there, what kind of environment you are going to operate tomorrow is not known to you, and if you try to maintain the status quo, that is something not good. The reason is that you do not want to change, and if you do not want to go for a change, then what will happen to our organization? Sometimes you think that okay, in terms of cost benefit analysis, if you go for a change, it is not good, but it could be a short term perspective, because even if you go for a cost effective approach, that okay, you think that by doing this you have been able to manage your organization very well, but this may not be the case tomorrow, because you are going to compete with other organizations tomorrow, right. So, if they are going to offer better products, better services, new products, and you still continue to have your own products, then it may not be good and you will not be succeeding, right. So, this fear of change is to be avoided. Okay. You need to go for a change, you not necessarily that you maintain the status quo and you think that okay, you have been making good profit, you have a good market share. So, you continue doing what you have been doing. You must go for a change depending upon the requirement, right. Another point is which is known as deep structures. Deep structures basically something that is rooted within the organization, okay, which is basically going to decide how organizations are going to work. Here I am giving you an analogy which is related to football. See what happens when you are going to play the game of a football. You are going to follow certain rules which is known as rule of the game. This represents the deep structure. It means that you cannot say deviate from the rule of the game. So, even if you want to win or whether you are going to lose, it hardly matters, but you need to follow the rule of the game. So, the rule of the game represents basically the deep structure, okay, and you cannot change the rule of the game, right. But what you can change is that how you are going to play the game, right. So, the game in play basically describes the period of equilibrium, right. So, what you do, you keep on playing and so suddenly what happens? You make changes, you do something which is going to affect the performance of the game. Okay. See, if you look at the game of the football, what happens? Most of the time you are playing on the ground, from moving from one place to another place, trying to pass the ball, but suddenly one person does certain things and he makes a goal, right, which is basically a coordinated effort of the entire team. It is not because the rule of the game has changed, but it is because the game in play, I mean the activity that you have been carrying out in order to perform well, right. One example that I have taken here is related to strategy, leadership and culture. Now, what they did, they did not want to offer a bike, okay, which is not, you can say, flexible. So, they wanted to go for a change in the bikes which could be flexible, which could be carried away anywhere just by folding it like anything, right, like folding chair. So, they went for a change in the strategy. there was a leadership support and people realized that okay, this kind of bike could be well marketed. So, they went for these kind of things. So, what they did here that yes, the basic structure of the bike is same, but what they did, the activities which is related to this bike was changed. So, what they did, they offered a product which was different from the normal bike product, and they went for this kind of foldable bikes which could be carried and even put inside the home also. So, why I am talking about these deep structures, because it is very deep rooted, it becomes a part of the culture for the organizations, and that basically suggests that yes, let us play the game, win or lose is something different, you go by that, you cannot change the rule of the game. But sometimes when you change the rule of the game, then it is a different thing altogether, right. Because if everybody follows the same norm, probably the rule of game remains same, but if you are going to change the rule of the game, then you are going to be the winner, right. So, the rule of the game of what you call the deep structures usually does not change, and that is what is going to guide the organizations, and that is why they do not go for a change, right. So, this basically as a force for inertia. So, you should not go by this rule of the game, you should try to change the rule of the game, because if you follow the rule of the game, basically you maintain the status quo, equilibrium is maintained. But if you change the rule of the game, then things become different, then others people will follow you. Look at some example in the telecom sector, what the Reliance Jio did. They offered a different kind of product, okay, which was entirely different from what other players are offering in the market. As a result, this new rule of the game, once it was established by a company, others started following it, because if they are not going to follow it, they would not be able to compete with them. But if now what actually happens, then it becomes normal for all the companies, all the companies, all the telecom sectors have similar products. So, what is happening here, then it again creates a deep structure, it means you cannot change it now, but what you can change is the kind of activities that you are going to have there in order to maintain the equilibrium, what kind of marketing effort you have, how efficient production products or services you are going to offer it, what are the other things that you are going to do, through which the performance of the organization is going to change, right. Then moving to the third part, tight and loose coupling. So, what actually happens when I am giving this analogy of say football, that how football is being played using a particular rule, and if you are not going to change the rule, you have to play more efficiently in order to win the game, right. So, since the deep structures are so strong that you cannot change it, okay. So, look at the various football clubs, they are tightly coupled with other clubs who play in the same league. So, they all of them follow the same rules, same norms in order to play. So, what is going to make them different is how efficiently they are going to play the game. Okay. So, it talks about both the tight and loose coupling, though you follow the same rules, but you try to play more efficiently, so that you win the game, right. So, here we are talking about two kind of forces. In order to maintain equilibrium, where you have periods of low intensity change, you do not do much. So, if the focus of forces of inertia are strong, it means you are not carrying out much activity in your organization, then you are not going to grow and develop yourself, right. Maybe this focus forces of inertia are going to be strong when as a department or as a organization you become a part of tightly coupled dependencies. It means that most of the organizations are dependent on each other. So, you are tightly coupling, right. But if you work independently, then there is a loose coupling, right. So, when I am talking about tight coupled means that this mutual dependency is more, and this create more inertia, right, and less activity on the part of the organizations or the department. But if there is a loose coupling, it means what? It means there is a less dependency, and if there is a less dependency, then you move from inertia to activity, and that is always good for the organization, and then you go for more discontinuous or radical changes. And the important aspect is that yes, most of the change cases what actually happens, the change managers are supposed to bring results as early as possible. So, there is a pressure to deliver short term results. You need to show the people and convince them that okay, see this is how we are improving, right. And by increasing our efficiency or aligning ourselves with the external environment, whatever you do, either you are going to align yourself with the market forces or you are trying to bring internal efficiency, whatever you are going to do, you need to bring results, and this pressure to deliver short term results sometimes is not good. For example, the other two things that we talked about, like the fear of change. Fear of change is also not good. Similarly, deep structures are not good, because you need to create new rules of the game for yourself, and then there should not be pressure to deliver short term results, because you cannot bring efficiency or you are through efficiency or what you call same aligning yourself to the market forces. When you are trying to bring about a changes, you need to ensure that how it is aligned with other systems. You simply cannot bring a change in the technology. You need to ensure that how this change in the technology is going to impact structure, systems and the people. So, there is a need for better alignment, and this is not possible if there is a pressure for delivering short term results, right. So, what we have discussed these factors, 3 factors of change. Okay, there is a basically this inhibits change and create a kind of a strategic drift. It means that you are not in a position to go ahead and move and bring about a successful change. So, if you are going to be guided by this, then what will happen? The organization does not change fast enough, or it ensures that it will remain aligned with the external environment. So, you will not be able to align yourself with the external environment. So, it is very important that you are not guided by these factors, that is fear of change, deep structures where you follow the same rules, and where there is a pressure for managers to deliver short term results, right. So, you need to identify what are the external triggers, so that you go for some kind of radical or transformational changes. So, when there is a misalignment with the external environment, then there is a major trigger, then you go for a transformational change. But the idea, the important thing here is that you should be able to identify this misalignment, where it is, so that you are able to bring about a radical transformation. And finally, we have to see that whether this theory is really supported or not, whether the evidence, that is this theory of punctuated equilibrium is correct, where it suggests that organizations go for both kind of things, continuous and discontinuous changes, or what you call incremental and radical changes. So, there was a study which was conducted by Tushman and others, and they in a computer organization, and they found that there is a discontinuous episodic change. It means that sometimes there are discontinuous changes, otherwise most of the organization go for maintaining equilibrium and move to a more incremental changes, right. So, if they are going to change the strategy, structure or other things, the pattern is predicted by punctuated equilibrium model, and these changes were spread over a long period of time, right. So, this suggests that there is a gradual paradigm, it means there is a incremental change. So, what we have talked about here is that how this theory of punctuated equilibrium is going to justify whether organizations are going by incremental change or continuous change, and what triggers them. Okay. In the next part, again we will discuss about that what are the things which basically are important for these kind of changes, whether it is incremental changes or transformational changes. Okay. So, with this we close it here. Thank you very much.